Mrs. Jacobson. Allow us to introduce ourselves first. My name is Alexandra and this is Kim.
Hi.
We are currently studying at the Collège Madame de Staël, and it's really nice to meet you today. Our first question is, how much of an impact do social media have on the radicalization of the youth? How do radicalizers use them to engage with young generation? And how it is possible that people choose to stay, and how they're brainwashed?
Yeah, thank you for this question and for coming here to the UN. And social media has a lot of impact on terrorism and radicalization. And as you know, social media messages can spread very quickly. I guess you are both on social media as well. And you see how much influence it can have on what you think and who you see and who you connect with. And it's the same with people who radicalize or terrorists or extremists. They really have now this new tool with which they can reach a lot of people that they could not reach before. Because before social media existed, they could not just put a poster on a wall or spread their propaganda by placing advertisements in newspapers or anything like that. And social media is a way that they can distribute this message relatively easily. So on the one hand, it is easier for them to reach people and reach new audiences and connect with people that they could not connect before. On the other hand, social media also makes it possible to make relationships between people who have never met before. So they can put these people into groups, for example, it's okay, Facebook groups, or they can connect with them on one-to-one, so they can really establish relationships with people who they want to radicalize, and they can kind of bring them into this online world where they can be brainwashed and radicalized and kind of detach them from their offline environment. So then more and more people are brought into these kind of groups, and radicalizers, they have more and more one-to-one conversations with these people. So that they can really distract them from what they were doing offline and really bring them into kind of their own propaganda and convince them of their own arguments. And that is very problematic. So both the fact that that social media can reach a lot of people, but also that these connections can be made more and more personal and intimate.
So what type of people are targeted, and do they really have a specific profile that would make them more vulnerable to this?
Yeah, so not everyone can easily be targeted, and I assume, for example, the three of us will not readily be approached by these people. But often there are people that are looking for an identity and they want to belong to a group in society, but often they feel excluded or discriminated against, or they're lonely. And these are people that are very vulnerable and they want to belong to a group. And these people who radicalize online, they really establish this group and this support system for these people in a very wrong way, but they do fulfill this need. And this is often the case with young people, because young people are often looking for an identity or to belong to a group, or they don't know yet what they want to do in life and where they want to go. And at the same time, young people, more than old people, although it is difficult to make this distinction, they also rely on social media for their information and the news that they hear, because, for example, older people still rely on multiple sources to get their news from, right? They read newspapers, they look for other websites online, not just on social media. So this is also one dimension. If you only get your information from social media, then it is much easier to convince you that a certain message is true and not something else.
Okay. So sorry. How can we prevent radicalization through the internet? So what tools or methods can be used to make sure that the internet remains as safe as possible?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very difficult one too. There are a couple of things that can be done. The most obvious thing is that you get rid of all the terrorist and extremist content online, and this is also what a lot of governments want to do. They are putting internet companies under pressure so that they remove all extremist material and content that is online as soon as possible. But of course that doesn't prevent terrorism. These extremists could use other channels or now they use more and more, for example, WhatsApp or Telegram or encrypted, we call it encrypted messaging services, so that governments, for example, cannot read what they tell each other. So another thing that is done more and more is to distribute counter messages. So, for example, there's one example of Google placing advertisements of positive messages against terrorism on videos that show that are in support of terrorist movements, for example. But this is also very difficult because this can be perceived as if it is propaganda by a government. If you are a bit brainwashed, and if you're a bit brainwashed and you are convinced of a terrorist narrative, then you might think that the ad that they play before a video or the messages that you receive to not support terrorism, that is just government propaganda. So it's very difficult to get this right. And then the last measure that you can take, and that is probably the most important one, is to take offline measures. So not all the measures need to be tackling online content, but invest in education, make youth and other people aware that what they can encounter online, that they should not just get their information from one source, but also projects to reduce inequalities or discrimination so that people don't feel left out of society. And you cannot never completely prevent it, but taking these steps together is very important, that you don't just remove all the content that is online, but also have counter messages and also invest in education and reducing inequalities.
And the last question is, freedom of speech is extremely important. Do you think we should establish restriction? And how can we know the difference between a simple thought and a real threat?
Yeah, that is a super important question. And this is probably the most difficult thing in combating online radicalization, because if you delete just anything that is online that could be extremist, then there is no freedom of expression. And often with terrorism, for one person might think that someone is a terrorist, and someone else might think that person is a freedom fighter or an activist. So this is super, super important, but also really difficult to get right. And we now see that there are more and more laws, for example, by countries that say Twitter and Facebook, they need to delete any extremist content within 24 hours, otherwise they get a fine. And there's more and more regulation like that. But that could mean that internet companies will be very strict and they will remove more content than necessary just because they don't want to get punished. So this is very difficult also because these internet companies might ultimately be deciding, okay, this is okay and this is not okay. And that is very dangerous because we don't want internet companies to decide that. We want lawyers to decide that, or people who study these things and who studied ethics. So this is a very problematic development, and at the same time it is difficult to prevent it because governments and politicians, they often immediately want to blame something when for example a terrorist attack happens. They want to be shown as saying, oh, look at this internet company, they didn't protect the online environment enough. So this is a difficult balance to get right. Probably what will be most important is that there is some sort of mechanism to, when content is removed, that you can say, hey, my content has been removed, why is that? And can it be readjusted, can it be posted online again if it turns out that this is a violation of my freedom of expression? So if there is some sort of way to address these things, that might already be a positive step.
Sorry, I just have one more question about what you were saying. So they're not professionals. They don't really know 100% what they're doing. So, I mean, they're trying their best, but they're not sure if what they're doing is correct. So they could also miss something or not.
Yeah, that is true too. I do think there are a lot of professionals because these companies are really big. So they will make sure to really get the right people, to get lawyers and to get these kind of people, but it remains a company and they have commercial interests. But about missing something, this is of course more and more difficult because I think every 60 seconds there are 400,000 tweets posted or something like that. You cannot just go through all of them and check if there is anything radical. So that is why a lot of internet companies now have robots and artificial intelligence that goes automatically through it and deletes things or flags things that are problematic. But that will be very difficult to address. If something is deleted, if your post is deleted by a robot, it is difficult to know why this robot has deleted it because it's automatic. So this will become a very difficult challenge. It is already a difficult challenge and it will become even more difficult. But at the same time, some people exaggerate the problem of online radicalization a little bit and they say we need to really, really make sure that we delete anything that is problematic, while extremists will always find a way to influence people, whether it is through social media or other means that may appear in the future. And therefore it is also so important to also focus on education and these kind of more social and offline measures.
Well, thank you very much for answering our questions on the radicalization through the internet. We learned a lot.
Yeah? Oh,
Yes,
happy.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.